That's a heavy question, and it's a bit of a mix-up, but a common one. It links two different terrible stories from two different countries. The New Bedford Highway Murders happened in Massachusetts. The Highway of Tears is in Canada. They are not the same thing, but both are about women who were targeted, killed, and left by the roadside. Both stories are about a search for justice that, for many, has never come. So, did a serial killer operate on the New Bedford Highway? Yes, authorities are almost certain one did. But it wasn't the Highway of Tears. To understand this, we have to look at each tragedy on its own. They deserve that. Let's start in Massachusetts. The year was 1988. New Bedford was a tough city. The fishing industry, its lifeblood, was struggling. There was unemployment. There was a drug problem, crack cocaine was hitting the streets hard, and like in many places where hope is scarce, a shadow economy grew. Some women, many of them struggling with addiction, turned to sex work to survive, to get their next fix. They were vulnerable. They were on the edge of society, often invisible to everyone except the men who used them and the man who would eventually hunt them. It all started in the summer. On July 3rd, 1988, a driver on Route 140 in Freetown, a town next to New Bedford, saw something in the woods off the shoulder of the highway. It was the body of a woman. She was Deborah Medeiros. She was 30 years old. She was a mother. She had been strangled. Deborah was known to have a drug problem and was involved in sex work in New Bedford's Weld Square, an area known for it. Her death was shocking, but in a city with its share of violence, it wasn't yet a sign of something more sinister. Then, less than a month later, another woman disappeared. Nancy Paiva, 36, was last seen in New Bedford. She also struggled with addiction. Her family knew something was wrong, but she was just gone. For months, there was no sign of her. The fear started to build in the community, especially among the women working the streets. They talked about a man in a certain type of car, about bad dates, about a feeling that something was watching them. The fall of 1988 was when the terror really took hold. In November, another woman vanished. Rochelle Clifford, 36, disappeared from the same area. She was a friend of Nancy Paiva. The pattern was becoming clear. These weren't random acts. Someone was targeting a specific type of woman from a specific part of the city. The police were under immense pressure. They knew they had a serious problem. They suspected a serial killer was at work. The media started calling him the New Bedford Highway Killer because of where the first victim was found. December brought the worst of it. The killer got bolder, or maybe just more desperate. On December 1st, the remains of Nancy Paiva, who had been missing since August, were finally found off the highway in Dartmouth. The same day, another woman, Mary Rose Santos, 26, was reported missing. Two more women, Sandra Botelho and Deborah Lynn McConnell, also vanished that month. It was a storm of disappearances. The city was panicked. Women were afraid to walk alone. The streets of Weld Square were quieter. The police formed a task force. They pulled in investigators from the state and surrounding towns. They profiled the killer. They believed he was likely a local man, someone who knew the area, who knew the roads, who knew where to dump a body without being easily seen. He was probably familiar with the street scene in New Bedford, maybe even a customer. He was organized enough to pick up these women, kill them, and dispose of their bodies without leaving many clues. The bodies kept turning up. In March of 1989, searchers found the remains of Rochelle Clifford, the woman who vanished in November. She was found near a highway interchange. A few days later, they found Mary Rose Santos not far away. Then, in April, they found Deborah Lynn McConnell, and then Sandra Botelho. They were all left in the woods, off the highways that snaked around New Bedford. Route 140, Interstate 195. These were the killer's dumping grounds. In total, 9 women were officially listed as victims of the New Bedford Highway Killer. Their bodies were all found between July 1988 and April 1989. 2 other women who disappeared during that time frame, Christine Montero and Marilyn Roberts, are also strongly believed to be victims, but their bodies have never been found. There are 11 women in less than a year, all from the same background, all taken from the same city. The investigation focused on a few suspects. The most prominent one was a man named Kenneth Ponte. He was a local lawyer with a troubled past. He was known to associate with sex workers and use drugs. In fact, he knew several of the victims personally. He had even represented one of them in court. He seemed to fit the profile. He was smart, he knew the area, and he had a dark side. The police arrested him. The case against him went to trial for the murder of Rochelle Clifford. But the evidence was all circumstantial. There was no DNA, no confession, no murder weapon. The prosecution's case was built on the fact that Ponte was the last person seen with Clifford. His defense argued it wasn't enough. The jury agreed. Kenneth Ponte was acquitted in 1990. He walked free. After the acquittal, the case went cold. The task force eventually disbanded. The leads dried up. For years, there was silence. The families of the victims were left with no answers. The city was left with a scar. The killer was still out there. Maybe he had died. Maybe he was in prison for something else. Maybe he was still living a quiet life, a monster hiding in plain sight. Over the years, other names have come up. There was talk of a local man who was a person of interest and later died. There were theories about multiple killers, though the method seemed too consistent for that. The most accepted theory remains that one man was responsible for the majority, if not all, of the murders. He picked up these women, strangled them, and left them like trash along the highways. He exploited their vulnerability, their trust, and their desperation. He was a serial killer. And he got away with it. The story of the New Bedford Highway Murders is a story of a specific time and a specific place. It's a snapshot of a city in crisis and a predator who used that crisis as his cover. It is a story of a concentrated reign of terror that lasted less than a year but has haunted a community for over 3 decades. Now, let's go somewhere else. Let's travel thousands of miles northwest to a different highway in a different country. This is the Highway of Tears. This isn't a story about one killer in 1 year. This is a story that spans over 50 years and involves dozens of victims. It is not a single case, it is a national crisis. The Highway of Tears is a nickname for a stretch of Highway 16 in British Columbia, Canada. It runs about 450 miles, from the city of Prince George in the interior to the coastal town of Prince Rupert. It's a long, lonely road. It cuts through dense forests, mountains, and remote landscapes. Small towns, many of them Indigenous communities, are scattered along the way. For miles and miles, there can be nothing but trees and road. The problem here is not just one monster. The problem is systemic. It's rooted in poverty, in geography, and in the deep, painful history of Canada's relationship with its Indigenous peoples. For generations, Indigenous women and girls have been disappearing or been found murdered along this highway and the roads that connect to it. The official list from the RCMP's investigation, called Project E-PANA, identifies 18 women. But Indigenous leaders and community activists say the real number is much, much higher. They count more than 40. The first widely acknowledged case was that of Gloria Moody in 1969. She was a 26-year-old Indigenous woman from the Nuksock Nation. She went missing after leaving a pub in the town of Williams Lake, which is south of the highway but often included in the broader context of the crisis. Her body was found in the woods by a cattle ranch. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered. Her case was never solved. Over the next 5 decades, the stories piled up. Each one is a universe of pain. In 1973, 12-year-old Monica Ignis disappeared while walking home along the highway near Thornhill. Her body was found months later. In 1989, 15-year-old Cecilia Nical was last seen hitchhiking on Highway 16. She was never seen again. In 1994, Ramona Wilson, 16, told her family she was going to a friend's house to meet up for a dance. She planned a hitchhike. Her body was found nearly a year later near the local airport. In 2002, 22-year-old Nicole Hoare, a tree planter, vanished while hitchhiking to a music festival. She was a white woman, and her case brought a lot of national media attention, which highlighted for many Indigenous families how little attention their own missing daughters and sisters had received. The list goes on and on. Ayala Sarek Oger, 14, was found in a ditch in 2006. Madison Scott, 20, vanished from a campsite in 2011. The names, the faces, the ages change, but the core of the story remains the same. A young woman, often Indigenous, vanishes from the side of a lonely road. Why does this keep happening? You have to understand the context. Many of the communities along Highway 16 are poor. There is no reliable public transportation, there's no Greyhound bus service anymore. If you don't have a car, and many people don't, how do you get to the next town for a doctor's appointment? How do you get to a job? How do you visit family? You hitchhike. It's not a choice made for fun or adventure. It's a choice made out of necessity. It's a part of life. And this necessity creates a constant supply of vulnerable targets for predators. And then there's the deeper issue, systemic racism. For decades, when an Indigenous woman went missing, the response from law enforcement was often slow, indifferent, or dismissive. These families reported that police would suggest their daughter had just run off, that she was a party girl, that she'd be back in a few days. They weren't treated as urgent, high-risk disappearances. This initial inaction gave killers a crucial head start. Evidence was lost. Trails went cold. The message sent, whether intended or not, was that these lives mattered less. This is the huge difference between New Bedford and the Highway of Tears. In New Bedford, the police knew they had a serial killer on their hands relatively quickly. They formed a task force. They threw resources at it. They made an arrest, even if it didn't lead to a conviction. On the Highway of Tears, for years, each case was treated as a separate tragedy. There was no sense of a connected pattern, at least not from an official standpoint. The families on the ground knew. They saw the pattern. But it took decades for law enforcement to catch up and form a dedicated task force. So was there a single serial killer on the Highway of Tears? The answer is almost certainly no. The timeline is too long, the geography is too vast, the methods of death, where known, are different. The consensus among investigators and experts is that multiple predators have used this highway as a hunting ground over the years. It's a road that attracts monsters because it offers them what they want: isolation and victims with no other choice. However, police have linked at least one known serial killer to the highway. His name was Bobby Jack Fowler. He was an American drifter and construction worker who died in an Oregon prison in 2006. In 2012, DNA technology advanced enough to link him to the 1974 murder of Colleen McMillan, a 16-year-old girl who was hitchhiking on a nearby highway. Once they had his DNA, police realized he was a strong suspect in the murders of at least 2 other young women from the same era, Gail Ways and Pamela Darlington. Fowler worked in Prince George in the 70s. He fits the profile of a transient predator. How many other women he killed, nobody knows. He is a piece of the puzzle, but he is not the whole picture. He doesn't explain the disappearances in the 90s or the 2000s. Another convicted killer, Cody Ligabokov, was arrested in 2010. He murdered 3 women and a teenage girl near Prince George. While not technically on the Highway of Tears, his hunting ground was the same region. He proves that predators are still active there. He was caught by a fluke when a sharp-eyed rookie cop pulled him over for erratic driving and saw blood in his truck. It shows how easily these men can operate in the shadows. So when you ask the question, you're tapping into 2 very different kinds of horror. One is the story of a single, focused predator who terrorized the city for a year. The other is the story of a place, a road, that has been a site of violence for half a century, a violence enabled by a system that has failed Indigenous women and girls time and time again. Let's put them side by side. In New Bedford, the victims were mostly in their late 20s and 30s. They were caught in a cycle of addiction and sex work. The killer was likely a local man, someone who was part of that scene, who knew their vulnerabilities intimately. The terror was concentrated, a fire that burned hot and fast, and then seemingly went out, leaving behind cold ashes and unanswered question. The central mystery is, who was the man? One man. On the Highway of Tears, the victims are often much younger. Teenagers, girls just on the cusp of adulthood. They are not necessarily involved in high-risk activities. They are just trying to get from one place to another in a region with no other options. The killers are likely a mix of transient workers like Fowler, local predators like Legibakov, and other unknown men who passed through, saw an opportunity, and took it. The terror is not a fire, it's a slow-burning, deep-seated rot. It's a chronic condition, not an acute crisis. The central mystery is not just who, but why? Why has this been allowed to happen for so long? The answer is not about one man. It's about history, poverty, race, and indifference. The similarities are haunting, though. In both places, the victims were women on the margins. Whether it was the streets of New Bedford or the isolated communities of northern British Columbia, these were women who society had, in many ways, already failed. Their vulnerability was their death sentence. In both places, the highways served as a tool for the killers. A way to find victims, a way to transport them, and a way to discard them. The road promises connection and escape, but for these women, it was the end of the line. The woods along the shoulder became their unmarked graves, and in both places, families are left to fight for justice. In New Bedford, the daughters and sons of the victims are now adults, still hoping for a break in the case, still hoping for someone to be held accountable for their mother's deaths. On the Highway of Tears, the families have become powerful advocates. They have marched. They have held vigils, they have demanded inquiries, they painted red dresses and hung them from trees to symbolize the missing. They forced a nation to confront an ugly truth it had ignored for too long. Their fight led to a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. It was a painful, necessary process that laid bare the systemic failures that created the highway's legacy. So, to come back to your original question, a serial killer did operate around the highways of New Bedford in 1988. But that tragedy is separate from the long, sprawling horror of Canada's Highway of Tears, where multiple killers have operated over many decades. It's easy to see why they get mixed up. The themes are the same: vulnerable women, lonely roads, a hunt for a ghost, and a deep, unending grief. Both stories tell us something about the society they happened in. They show us who is considered disposable. They show us how easily someone can slip through the cracks and how hard it is to get justice once they're gone. These aren't just crime stories, they are human tragedies that force us to look at the dark corners of our world, whether it's a struggling New England city or a vast, beautiful, and dangerous Canadian wilderness. The names of the women are what matter: Deborah Medeiros, Nancy Paiva, Rochelle Clifford. But Gloria Moody, Ramona Wilson, Ayala Sarek Auger, they were real people. And their stories, though born of different circumstances, end in the same heartbreaking silence. The search for answers continues on two different highways in two different nations, united by a common tragic thread.